It started in 1880 with a straightforward government contract. French officials wanted an elaborate bronze entrance for a new museum dedicated to decorative arts, something grand enough to greet visitors in Paris. Rodin said yes. What nobody could have predicted is that the museum itself would collapse before it ever opened. The planned site was cleared, and in its place rose a railway station instead. Decades later, that station was reborn as the Musée d'Orsay. And today, almost by accident, it houses Rodin's original plaster version of the very doors that were supposed to greet people at that long-abandoned museum. So, in a strange twist of fate, the work finally landed exactly where destiny intended, except it has never once functioned as an actual entrance. It just stands there, a doorway to nowhere. To understand how strange this project became, you have to look at where Rodin started. His early sketches show real discipline. He'd spent time studying Lorenzo Ghiberti's legendary bronze doors at the Florence Baptistery, and his first designs mirrored that structure closely. 8 clean panels, each one a distinct scene pulled straight from Dante's Inferno. Ghiberti had taken nearly 3 decades to complete his version and actually finished it. Rodin, on the other hand, would spend even longer chasing his own vision and never reach the finish line. Within just a few years, something shifted. Rodin started tearing down the very boundaries he'd built. The panels blurred together, the frames dissolved, figures spilled across borders that were supposed to contain them. According to curators at Japan's National Museum of Western Art, home to one of only 7 surviving bronze casts on the planet, Rodin essentially abandoned the structured storytelling of Dante altogether, plunging the entire composition into something closer to chaos. No clear sequence, no gravity, no narrative thread a viewer could simply follow from top to bottom. Now, here's where the details start to get genuinely strange. Look toward the very top of the doors, and you'll spot 3 muscular figures, bent forward, heads lowered, arms all pointing downward into the abyss beneath them. In Dante's poem, these represent the souls condemned at hell's threshold, gesturing toward that infamous warning carved above the gate: abandon all hope, all who enter. But here's the twist: almost nobody notices. Those aren't 3 separate sculptures. They're the exact same figure, cast 3 times from an identical mold, then rotated and angled so their arms converge toward one single point in space. In the 1880s, reusing an identical cast multiple times within one composition wasn't just unusual, it bordered on artistic heresy. And Rodin wasn't trying to hide the trick. He wanted you to notice the repetition. Drop your gaze a little lower and you'll find one of the most recognizable sculptures ever created, sitting quietly above the door panels as if it belongs to a completely different work altogether. Originally, Rodin called this figure the Poet, intending it to represent Dante himself, watching over the suffering souls below. On the actual gates, this figure measures barely 70 centimeters tall, perched more than 6 meters off the ground. Easy to miss entirely. The nickname that made it famous worldwide, the Thinker, wasn't even Rodin's idea. It came from the foundry workers who cast it. Most people who've seen the Thinker as a standalone bronze giant in a museum courtyard have no idea it was born as a tiny figure tucked into the architecture of hell itself. Then there's the piece Rodin chose to remove entirely. Originally placed on the left door panel, a pair of doomed lovers, Paolo and Francesca, condemned for adultery in Dante's second circle, were locked in an embrace so gentle and tender that it became one of the most beloved images in sculptural history. But in 1886, Rodin pulled them off the gates completely. Why? Because in his own assessment, the moment felt too tender, too full of joy, to belong inside a monument to damnation. That rejected embrace went on to live an entirely separate life as a freestanding masterpiece, the sculpture we now know simply as the Kiss. Ironically, it achieved global fame precisely because it didn't fit where it was born. And then there's a detail so small, so easy to walk past, that most visitors never even register it exists. Near the bottom right edge of the doors, a crouched figure rendered in low relief has been identified by historians as a self-portrait of Rodin himself, a piece they refer to as the Creator. One hand cradles his own bowed head, the other clutches a tiny female figure in his palm. If that identification holds true, then Rodin didn't just design hell from the outside looking in. He placed himself inside it, crouched beneath everything he built, holding a woman's image like an object in his grip. That image becomes far heavier once you learn who was actually shaping much of the surface detail on these doors. Around 1884, a 19-year-old sculptor named Camille Claudel joined Rodin's studio. According to the Musée Rodin, she handled some of the most technically demanding anatomical work on the gates: hands, feet, the small, intricate details most artists would consider grueling. She became his collaborator, his lover, and eventually his professional rival, before their relationship collapsed and her own legacy was swallowed by his enormous shadow. Knowing that, the self-portrait at the base of the gates, a man holding a small female figure in his palm, reads very differently. In 1900, Rodin finally displayed the gates publicly, the only time he ever did so during his lifetime at the Universal Exhibition in Paris. By then, he'd stripped away many of the projecting figures, worried they clashed too harshly against the background. Audiences barely reacted. Rodin never exhibited the piece again for the rest of his life. So what actually happened here? Was this 37-year obsession a case of an artist simply unable to declare anything finished, or was the endless revision the entire point? Art historian Albert Elson, who produced the definitive scholarly study of the work, argued that Rodin's constant breaking, multiplying, and reassembling of figures represented a deliberate rupture from centuries of sculptural tradition, a rejection of the idea that narrative art needs a tidy, completed ending. Under that reading, the gates aren't a failure. They're a finished philosophical statement that art doesn't owe anyone closure. But flip that interpretation, and a darker, more human story emerges. 37 years of constant addition and subtraction, of never casting, never delivering, never letting go. A doorway built for a building that never existed, populated with figures who kept disappearing from the composition entirely, created by a man who tucked his own image into the lowest corner of his own underworld and seemingly couldn't bring himself to look away from it. Rodin died without ever seeing his work cast in bronze. The first cast wasn't completed until 1926, nearly a decade after his death, commissioned by an American collector who himself died 2 years before it was finally installed at the Rodin Museum in Philadelphia. 6 more casts would follow over the next 70 years. Today, 7 versions of the Gates of Hell exist across the globe. In Paris, Philadelphia, Tokyo, Zurich, Stanford, Shizuoka, and Seoul. 3 continents, 7 entrances, and not one of them opens onto anything at all.